Let's have an honest discussion about how tariffs and trade imbalances affect business. This is the non-political view. Yes, you'll hear a lot of nonsense coming from politicians. This is the straight stuff that you need to know as a business person, how it actually affects you. So in brief, we're going to talk about what tariffs are, how they work, some examples, and then we'll talk a little bit about trade and trade imbalance because it's oftentimes located together. I'm not with the CBP or never been affiliated with them. However, it's a very good source of information. So I've included their logo over there so you can see it. An import tariff is a tax, plain and simple. And this is from the government website. It's a direct tax on imported goods from a foreign country paid for by the person or company who imports the good. That's it. It is not paid for by countries. It is paid for by the importer, period. End of statement. Tax. It's a tax. It's a charge to the taxpayer by a government. And we all know about those: sales tax, gas tax, income tax, and a tariff tax is just another type of tax. All tariffs are taxes. All taxes are not tariffs. A tariff is just a specific type of tax, like a gas tax. A duty is a word that you often hear about the same time as when people are talking about tariffs. A duty is when the tariff is hidden. So for example, if Walmart buys a widget from China for $2, they pay the import tariff of 25 cents. They sell it to you for $4. So it's a $2 item cost plus 25 cents for the tariff and $1.75 for their profit. There are no free lunches. Companies must pass along their expenses or they go broke. Tariffs can vary by things like material composition. So when I was helping my friend with his clothing company, whether the stuff was made out of leather, cotton, wool, synthetic, whatever, that made a huge difference to tariffs. The base category and the rate. Also, we have gender and age, men's and women's clothes. He made men's and women's jackets, and those were charged different rates, as well as children's clothes. However, he didn't do those. Construction methods. So, for example, a knit t-shirt will have one rate versus woven like this dress shirt. Yeah, they'll have different codes and different rates. How the material is used, or how the thing is used. So is it a coat, a shirt, a bag, a shoe? All of those will have different rates. And the country of origin. So the country of origin is very important, and it oftentimes changes depending on who we're friendly with at the time, who we're having good trade relations with. If we have agreements in place like NAFTA, tariffs can be very low or non-existent. However, agreements don't always include the U.S. So for example, if Japan and say Vietnam have an agreement and they're passing stuff back and forth and then they ship it to the U.S., their agreement over there would have no impact if they have a trade agreement for no tariffs. However, if Vietnam and Japan have tariffs and one is charging the other, then that will uplift the price, and then you order it from Japan, it comes to the U.S., and you're paying a hidden tariff that happened outside the country. The goods are standardized under what's called the Harmonized Schedule by the World's Customs Organization. And these are the general categories. So animal and animal products are from 1 to 5, 6 to 15 are vegetable products, 6 to 24 foodstuffs, and so on. And there's a reason I got this red here is because I ran a search on dog food, and here's what came up. And you'll notice that a whole lot of categories show up. I mean, this went on and on. So I always left this type of thing up to experts when I was going to import something. Yeah, because you may think you know what you're doing, and you go out there and you look it up and you say, okay, this is the tariff. And then you import something, and then you're hit with a bunch of surprises because it may fall under one or more categories, or it may fall under a category you never suspected. So yeah, it can turn a good deal into a very bad deal. An actual example, I bought imaging equipment from a country overseas. It cost $2,500 and the shipping was about $25. Before the equipment was even shipped, I paid the seller $2,500 or $2,525. And when it arrived, I was notified by Customs Clearinghouse that I could come pick it up and I would have to be charged a 7% tax on the item. I went to pick it up. I paid our customs agent $175. So he calculated that based on the $2,500 price times 7%. And I paid that. And had I imported it as a company, had my company imported it, I would have paid that same $175. So this is not something I'm going to ask you to believe me on. No. You can prove it to yourself. You can just buy something from eBay from a foreign country. The U.S. used to have limits of about $800, and I'm saying that in a very general way because some things always have tariffs and some things never have tariffs, but the general limit was about $800 before they started charging it. So the base price of what you were buying had to be about $800 up. That has been changing. Again, check with people who are experts on this. But if you look at what eBay says on their site, eBay says if you are selling to buyers outside the U.S., you should inform them about the potential import charges they need to pay when they receive their item. So tariffs also apply to foreigners. So it's not just you importing and you have to pay the tax. If you sell something to somebody in Japan, the Japanese person will have to pay the tariff. So tariffs are paid by the end consumer. U.S. customers who import goods over $800 from other countries may need to pay tariffs and fees, also known as duties. Tariffs, which vary by country, are calculated as a percentage of the shipment of the item's price. So, yes, check with the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol website. Do not get surprised by something. Sadly, I have been. Let's talk about trade imbalance, which is kind of well, it's talked about often in terms of tariffs, and frankly, they're kind of distant cousins. The balance of trade is the difference between the value of a country's imports and their exports in a given period of time. That's all there is to it. It's how much you import versus how much you export. If you export more than you import or vice versa, then there's a trade imbalance. It is very loosely related to national debt. So is it a good or bad thing? Well, let's say I order a bar of gold from Africa. It costs me $1.2 million. Africa gets $1.2 million in U.S. currency, and I get $1.2 million in gold. So who's better off? Well, the question is, it depends on what you want, but the U.S. is 1.2 million richer in assets, and Africa is 1.2 million richer in currency. So there's a balance. The same is true if I import iron from Australia and I buy $1 million worth. So Australia got $1 million cash, I got $1 million in iron. Maybe I can turn that iron into cars and I can sell them and actually make more than my $1 million back. So this is where it gets tricky. Yeah, $1 million in cash versus $1 million in iron depends on what I do with that iron. If I use it for something useful and I export it, I can actually do better than if I just kept that $1 million in cash. So let's run through this example. The U.S. imports $2 billion in goods from the U.K. and the U.K. buys back $1 billion in U.S. goods, okay? Pretty simple transaction. So the U.S. got $2 billion in goods, the U.K. got $2 billion in cash. That's balanced, right? We are both that much better off. Okay, let's say the U.S. got $1 billion in cash, the U.K. got $1 billion in goods. That would be balanced. So overall, is it balanced? Well, each side got richer in either goods or cash. It depends on what you want. The UK got $2 billion cash and $1 billion goods richer, and the US got $2 billion in goods and $1 billion cash richer. So the wealth of both sides just increased, but in different ways. So it really boils down to who ends up with more cash and who ends up with more stuff. And sometimes stuff, depending on how it's used, can be more valuable than the cash, which is why we do these transactions. But in the worst case, both cash and goods should be equally valuable. Okay, pretty simple. That's the end of this quick summary. On to the next topic.